Hi guys, it is Tamara. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about how clients and patients can traumatize their own therapist. Now this is a topic that I actually put in the community section and I asked you guys to vote on it. And thank you so much for voting. Like a lot of you voted. I think over 100 of you voted. And I think you want to see this video. I think one of the reasons why you want to see this video is because most therapists are pretty guarded and they don't allow their clients or their patients to really get an inside look into their lives. You know, I'm one of them. I'm very compassionate with my clients and I hug some of them and I talk with them, and especially because they're children and adolescents and young adults going through a lot of things. So I offer that part of me to my clients, but for the most part, I'm pretty much a private person. You don't know much about my personal life because I don't give my personal life to the world, right? I share some things, even with you guys on this channel, I share some things, but I don't give a lot. I give enough just so we can connect and get to know each other and so you can learn to trust me and vice versa. But other than that, you know, there's a wall up, right? So there's a lot of therapists like that. There's some therapists that really do hide behind a wall and you never get a chance to even see emotions on their face or hear emotions in their words. And I think that's a little bit too extreme, but there are some like that. So I think this video was interesting to you guys just for that reason. So I'm going to give you at least 8 ways that a client and a patient can traumatize their therapist. Let's jump in. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. For all of you who are subscribed and participating, thank you so much. And for those who are new, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button so you can stick around with us and be a part of our growing and validating community. And let me briefly introduce myself just so you will know who I am. My name is Tamara and I'm internationally and board certified as a trauma therapist, but I'm also licensed in mental health and I specialize within my private practice treating children, teens, families, as well as adults. So, you know, as I stated at the very beginning of this video, I see therapists as pretty much individuals who have a really important role to play, but they often hide behind a wall. And it really makes it difficult for the client or the patient to understand that, you know, the therapist is really struggling with things on their own. And just sometimes working with that particular individual, that client, that patient can really lead to trauma. So let's just jump into some of these things, and I welcome your comments in the comment section. And also, as a disclaimer, I want to put the disclaimer right over here that this video is not intended to make any of you who are in therapy feel bad or to feel guilty for needing somebody to help you get through issues. This video is simply educational, and it's just to give you a little bit of a peek inside the lives of most therapists. And let me just say, there are some therapists also, this is a part of the disclaimer, that have had their own trauma histories, who have had their own problems in the past. Not all of them, right? Some of them are just born to be helpers and they are wonderful at it. Others have experienced some really horrific situations and that's what pushed them into the field in the first place. That could be a good or a bad thing from my experience and probably from yours too. But, you know, keep in mind that sometimes therapists are overwhelmed because they probably shouldn't be doing counseling in the first place. So let me throw that in there as well as a disclaimer. But, you know, for the purposes of this video, let's go ahead and just jump in. And I want to point out some ways a therapist can become traumatized. Now, the first way that a therapist can become traumatized by their client or their patient is through compassion fatigue. Now, when a therapist such as myself works internationally with people who are dealing with trauma, you know, that can really start to take its toll because you're not only sitting and listening, but you're dissecting, evaluating, inspecting, questioning, building insight around, working with, examining, stretching, right? Tossing around all these different concepts and behaviors and symptoms and thought patterns of the patient, the client, that it can be really difficult to manage your own emotions and all of that. You know, when I started about, well, I've been in the field now for 13 years. This year is my 13th year. But when I first started as a therapist in grad school, I think it might have been my 4th or 5th year as a graduate student, I found myself really struggling with compassion fatigue, and it actually laid me off for an entire year. I was so tired. I had been working in a daycare with babies. I loved I did an internship with babies in a daycare. It was more of a child developmental center, so I had a little bit of an opportunity to work with the babies, but I also did more observation and research on normative and abnormal behavior. And so in that environment, I saw kids who were being abused by staff. I saw kids who had really careless parents come pick them up at the end of the day. I also had grad school work to do, and that was maybe 7 classes a semester, right, that I had to take care of and I had to score well in. I also had to do an internship and a practicum. It's basically the same thing, but that's when, the school kind of throws you out in the environment and forces you to learn. And so I worked in a psychiatric hospital, but I also worked in the daycare. And then I had my own personal life. And by the time I got to graduation and I achieved my graduate degree, I just felt exhausted. I think I had compassion fatigue. I did not have the flexibility to really give of my heart in a way that I wanted to or needed to because of being so very burned out. Now, let me also highlight that burnout and compassion fatigue are very different things. Sometimes they can sound similar, but here's the difference. Burnout is the result of job-related stress, and that could be anything. That could be, your manager is making you deliver mail to a variety of streets that you don't belong on and you're really, really exhausted. It could also be that you work in a vet, you work, as a vet, and, you're seeing a bunch of animals because of COVID and people are afraid that their animals may have the virus. And so you've seen over 90 pets in 3 weeks' time. Right? That could be burnout, right? It's really having a compilation of stress on you and really working outside of the confines of your job title or being stretched to the limit. Compassion fatigue is more so the result of listening to repeated traumatic incidents over and over and over. And compassion fatigue is something that a therapist, a psychotherapist, a mental health professional is likely to experience, and not so much burnout. The job is stressful. It's going to lead to compassion fatigue for us is hearing one client after the next, after the next, after the next, who's dealing with a traumatic situation and there's no clear answers. That is going to lead to compassion fatigue. Now, let me just briefly go over what compassion fatigue is and burnout. Compassion fatigue, just to give you a short definition, is emotional and physiological exhaustion, okay? And the exhaustion is the result of compassion. It's the result of listening to multiple traumatic situations. It's a diminished ability to empathize. So I like to kind of make that clear, especially in videos, that compassion fatigue and burnout are just, they're rather different. And I think it's important to understand the differences. Okay, let's get to the next one, guys. So we did compassion fatigue and burnout. The next thing is countertransference. Now, I've been in situations as a therapist where, I have had, second thoughts about counseling fathers or second thoughts about counseling men of a certain age. Now, I'm out of my 20s, okay? And so, I've had a lot of experience in this field, and I know when countertransference is likely to happen. And what I do when I sense that that's a possibility is I either refer the client before anything ever happens, or I make it very clear what the boundary is so that everything will be clarified from the start, But there are some therapists who do experience countertransference. And one of the reasons why is because sometimes the client will experience transference and they will begin to kind of emotions onto the therapist, or project certain attitudes and dispositions and belief patterns onto the therapist. And that can create a situation where the therapist then grabs a hold of that and then they start reciprocating. And that's not really healthy when that gets going, especially if it's not dealt with appropriately. Now, I talk about transference right up here in this video and countertransference right over here as well, in case you want to go and check that video out or those 2 videos out at the end. Okay. The next thing, guys, is emotional detachment from family. Now, I love my family with all of my heart. So I try not to be emotionally detached, but I'm not a perfect individual. And after I've given of myself emotionally to my client all day long, and I actually see 13 clients a day, sometimes it's 15, it just depends, and a total of 52 a week, depending on how my week goes and if there's cancellations and so forth. But after giving my heart to them all week long, and this is most therapists, sometimes it's really hard to give even more of yourself, and sometimes your family is cut short. So some therapists will deal with emotional detachment from their family, their friends, and even their coworkers. They lose an aspect of themselves emotionally because they're constantly giving. And sometimes, there are difficult clients that require a lot of attention. And sometimes it can feel like, you're working with someone under the age of 10, sometimes if it's an adult. And sometimes if you're me, you're working with children, teens, and families. And that's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of issues there as well. And sometimes issues come up like sexual abuse, or, Child Protective Services has to get involved, or the case has a lot of management needs, right? So now I have to become a case manager and a social worker and a reporter and a researcher. And, sometimes that it can pile up. Let me just throw out there really quickly, guys, that I absolutely love my job, and I'm so, so grateful for where I get to be. And I love working with everybody that I have to work with. And I think that's a blessing that I can actually work in this position and like who I'm working with, whether that's in consultations or psychotherapy or writing books or teaching or researching, whatever I'm doing in this field. I love it. I consider it a gift from God. However, I've gotten tired and I've questioned how long am I going to be able to do this again? And so there's a lot of therapists who are also struggling with that as well. It's a part of being human, and it's a part of really having to give of yourself. So emotional detachment can happen. Okay, the next one, guys, is overindulgence in the client or the patient's life. Sometimes we're so invested in our work that we can sometimes get sucked in and pulled in to what our client needs or to what the patient needs, and it really does create a blurring of the lines. Sometimes therapy is a lot of gray, and because of that, it can really be difficult for therapists to say, let me just back out of this. Let me put the boundary up here, again, because we care so much. And sometimes if you're dealing with an unhealthy therapist, they are so gung-ho about really doing what never happened in their own situation or their own life that they go way too far. They're overindulgent. And that's an issue for you that you should be looking at your therapist a second time. You know what I mean? I talk about unethical therapists right up here in this video. It was a pretty famous video, so go ahead and check it out. A lot of people liked that video and found it useful. The next thing is sometimes therapists will deal with pessimism, hopelessness, and nihilism. Okay. And there are certain therapists who are just completely depressed about life because they have to hear depressed stories all the time. Not all therapists, but the ones who have really tough jobs, the ones who are on the front lines all the time, the ones who are working in mental health facilities or hospitals that require 24-hour care, the kind of mental health professionals who own a private practice or they balance a private practice and they see a lot of serious cases. Mental health is not just about anxiety and depression and a little bit of stress. Sometimes it's about dissociative identity disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and a bunch of other issues that could really weigh down the psychotherapist. So, some just walk away really depressed themselves, and, they need their own psychotherapist so they can kind of get some things off their chest and their heart and their mind, and that's perfectly okay. I actually encourage the ones that I supervise to do that. I think it's very healthy. The next thing is just like this sense of responsibility for the entire world. I know for myself, I have my hands on a little bit of everything. So I do YouTube because I absolutely like you guys and I love your participation. I think this is a great educational avenue and it grew and blew up so fast. So I'm so grateful for that. But I do YouTube, and then I'm writing a book. There's just a lot of things going on. And so, you can really get this sense of responsibility for the entire world. I was watching while I was getting ready for the day, I was watching the George Floyd trial, and just rewatching that while doing my work, I had this internal sense just rise up in me, this emotional fire of this has to stop. We cannot, and we must make this stop. This cannot happen again. And so, okay, there's that social justice side coming up and rising up, and then, you see poverty and you see the immigration challenges and you're like, oh, but I need to help there and I need to help there. And it's like, but I can't do it all. So it's almost like this, not so much a God complex because I'm certainly not like, I need to rescue the world. I'm more so like, what can we do collectively to fix this craziness, But there are some people who are really dedicated to helping, and you can get this sense of responsibility for the world, and that's overwhelming. Okay. And last but not least, I think there's often a frustration on the part of a therapist of not being able to generalize skills to their own life. Even though you're a therapist, it doesn't mean that you're going to have the skills to work out your marriage. Just because you're a mother doesn't mean that, you're going to be able to manage your household like a mother, and especially if you're a therapist and a mother, you may still lack the ability to manage your family. And I've been there before in my past as well. I'm like, wait a minute, why can't I manage my own family dynamics? But I can definitely manage Susie's like a pro, but I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't do it in my own life, And so, of course, that's because we're too close. But there are some therapists who really do beat themselves up because they're unable to juggle that as well. So guys, these are some of the ways that therapists can be traumatized in their own work, and it can lead to a lot of challenges for them. Some therapists have actually thrown in the towel and given up and they've walked away. Other therapists push through and really get better and become experts. And other therapists utilize their own challenges to really meet their patients' needs or their clients' needs. And that's kind of my approach as well. I take a cognitive behavioral approach, but I also take an existential spiritual approach that says anything we go through can be turned into something magical, and we can also use that for the benefit of others. So, hopefully this video was helpful to you guys and gives you some compassion for your therapist of what they may be going through or some of the things that they may be juggling with. So let me know in the comment section below if you've ever seen these things in your therapist or if you have thought of them. Thank you so much for being with me today, guys. In this video, I encourage you to give it a thumbs up and go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you want to stick around, and I will see you in the next video. I'm going to talk a little bit about difficult clients and what it's like for a therapist to deal with that. I'll see you then.